Tensions erupted in a Dallas courtroom this morning when U.S. Representative Jasmine Crockett found herself in an unexpected legal battle. Not as an advocate, but as the accused, what began as a minor court appearance spiraled into a fiery confrontation, with a notoriously combative judge sparking a chain of events that may upend the very foundation of courtroom accountability. The courtroom was already buzzing when Jasmine Crockett pushed open the heavy oak doors, her heels clicking sharply against the polished tile floor. It was 9:27 a.m., 12 minutes past the scheduled hearing time. The delay was uncharacteristic for her, but unavoidable just moments earlier. She had been pulled into an urgent call from the House Oversight Committee regarding a classified whistleblower report tied to prison abuse in North Texas. She couldn't ignore it, not when lives might be on the line. The courtroom, known locally as Pearson's Pit for the judge's reputation of berating young lawyers and first-time offenders, fell silent. The moment she entered, every eye turned toward her. Judge Michael Pearson, an aging figure with a furrowed brow and a penchant for public humiliation, leaned forward from the bench like a hawk. Spotting prey, well, Pearson drawled, flipping through paperwork with theatrical disdain. Congresswoman or not, punctuality matters in my courtroom. Crockett stood tall, adjusting the lapel of her dark blazer, her voice steady. Your Honor, I apologize for the delay. I received an urgent call from I'm not interested in your excuses. He cut in sharply, slamming his gavel once for effect. Contempt of court, $500. Fine. A few gasps rippled from the back benches where reporters had already begun taking frantic notes. Crockett raised a brow but didn't flinch. Are you finding me for being 12 minutes late due to an emergency connected to my congressional duties? Pearson's lips curled into a thin smile. I'd find anyone who disrespects this court. Her jaw tightened. This wasn't about her tardiness, it was personal. The room could feel it. The tension between the two began to thrum like static. The reason for her appearance was ironically benign, a traffic violation, wrongly flagged under her name due to a clerical error in a city vehicle registry she had opted to appear in person rather than have a staffer handle it, her way of standing on equal footing with her constituents. But what should have taken minutes was now turning into a spectacle. Jasmine calmly approached the podium. May I speak, Your Honor? Speak by all means, he said mockingly, leaning back in his chair. Entertain us. Her expression didn't waver. Your Honor, I've served as both a public defender and a legislator. I'm fully aware of courtroom protocol. I'm also aware of judicial discretion and how it's applied inconsistently to defendants based on age, race, or professional status. A low murmur of agreement rolled through the courtroom. Pearson's eyes narrowed. Are you implying this court is biased? I'm stating that patterns of punitive overreach deserve scrutiny. I've witnessed countless young defendants find jailed or embarrassed for infractions that others walk away from. This courtroom has a reputation. Pearson's tone dropped into a cold, calculated register. You're skating dangerously close to another contempt charge, representative, and you're skating dangerously close to violating the Code of Judicial Conduct. Jasmine countered, particularly Canon 3B5, which addresses bias and prejudice. Perhaps you're familiar with it. A stunned silence blanketed the room. Even the base shifted uncomfortably. Pearson was clearly taken aback, but masked it with a thin laugh. You think you can march in here and lecture me about ethics? I think if someone doesn't, you'll continue to bully defendants who can't defend themselves. The gallery was now fully engaged, phones discreetly recording reporters whispering. Jasmine continued, contempt of court is meant to uphold dignity, not enforce ego. I'll pay the $500 today, but I'll also be filing a formal inquiry with the Texas Commission on Judicial Conduct, and since you've chosen to make this personal, I'll be submitting data to support systemic review of your courtroom practices. Pearson's face had gone red, his gavel resting unused outside the courtroom. Jasmine's Comes director Alyssa Torres was already fielding calls from local media. News outlets had caught wind of what was going on. A city council member had just texted her they've been waiting for someone to stand up to him back. Inside, Pearson tried to regain control. You'll find that complaints against judges often go nowhere, Congresswoman, but if you wish to waste your time, be my guest. Crockett's gaze was razor sharp. This isn't about time, Judge Pearson, it's about precedent. Because if someone like me with legal training, public visibility, and congressional authority can be treated this way, imagine what happens to those without those shields. The hearing was officially adjourned, but no one moved. Pearson slammed the gavel twice. Get out of my courtroom. She didn't blink gladly. As she walked out, her phone vibrated. A message from a former court clerk who had seen the local news update. You're not wrong about him. I have records. Crockett stopped outside the courthouse, surrounded by cameras, and addressed the press. I was held in contempt today for being 12 minutes late due to a congressional emergency, but the real contempt is what happens in this courtroom. Every day, two young people, two black and brown defendants. To those without privilege, today we start asking questions. What had begun as a minor court error was rapidly transforming into something else, a collision between justice and power, between intimidation and resistance. And while the confrontation had ended, the real battle was just beginning, because behind Pearson's bench were years of unchecked rulings, and Jasmine had just lit the match by the time she returned to her office that afternoon. The story had already spread across every major Texas outlet. Congresswoman, held in contempt by controversial judge, blared across headlines. The video clip, grainy, shaky, but clear, showed Jasmine Crockett standing firm as Judge Pearson barked down at her. Twitter was ablaze. Local activists, attorneys, even public defenders across the country were reposting it, tagging it with hashtags like Pearson, Pitfall, and Justice, Not Ego. But inside the walls of the George L. Allen Courthouse, things were far less digital and far more personal. Judge Michael Pearson was livid. He sat in his chambers, pacing tightly behind his mahogany desk, his phone buzzing non-stop. His clerk, a young woman named Dana, stood silently, trying to remain invisible as he snapped at no one in particular. She thinks this is going to scare me, Pearson hissed, tossing a legal pad across the desk. She thinks a few reporters and a couple tweets are going to unseat 30 years of judicial authority. Dana swallowed. Sir, the commission's office called. They're asking for a statement about this morning's incident, and the state bar just emailed about your comment regarding her wasting her time. He wheeled around. Get me that hearing transcript, unedited. Now meanwhile, Jasmine was already 3 steps ahead in her Dallas district office. She'd convened a quiet war room with her legislative staff, legal advisors, and 2 former public defenders she trusted from her early law days. Laptops glowed, coffee cups lined the table. Everyone spoke in clipped, purposeful tones. I've already filed the misconduct inquiry, Jasmine said, but we need more. Anecdotal reports won't be enough. We need patterns, sentencing, disparities, gender bias, racial profiling, anything with his name on it. Docket, data transcripts. Got it, said Terrence, her legal researcher. I'm cross-referencing dismissed motions and objections overridden by Pearson. Over the past 5 years, there's a spike, especially among defendants under 30. Media is reaching out for comment. Alyssa Hercombe's director added national MSNBC, CNN, even The Hill. Do we go public? Jasmine didn't hesitate. We go public, but strategically. This isn't just about me, it's about Pearson's courtroom being a microcosm for the systemic problems everywhere we tell that story. Outside the courthouse was swarming with both protesters and press. Some held signs with phrases like justice shouldn't be personal and power is not above scrutiny. Others simply chanted, we see you, Jasmine. Back inside the courtroom, Pearson wasn't retreating. He opened court that afternoon with a chilling address to a stunned room. This morning, the decorum of this courtroom was undermined by a blatant act of political grandstanding, he said, voice steady, eyes cold. Let me be clear. This bench is not a state AG. This gavel is not a prop, and the next person who confuses either will be sanctioned to the fullest extent allowed by law. The threat hung in the air like fog, but for every word he spoke, a new crack appeared in the marble pedestal he stood on. Across town, Jasmine met quietly with 2 young attorneys who had clerked under Pearson years ago. They were cautious, nervous even, but resolute. You're right, one of them, Marissa, said. He berates public defenders, overrules them just to make a point. He gives harsher sentences if a defendant speaks back even slightly. Did you ever report it? Jasmine asked. Every time. No response. Her jaw set. That ends now. That night she took to national TV. Sitting under studio lights across from a seasoned political anchor, she spoke with the same she had that morning, controlled, clear, but unflinching. I didn't challenge Judge Pearson because I'm a politician. I challenged him because I'm a lawyer and a black woman who's seen firsthand what unchecked judicial power looks like when it collides with vulnerable people. He fined me $500. That's a slap on the wrist for someone like me, but that same man has levied life-altering punishments on people who couldn't afford to fight back. The clip went viral before the interview ended. By the next morning, Pearson's courtroom was under a microscope. A coalition of civil rights attorneys announced they were reviewing hundreds of his past cases. Jasmine's office was flooded with emails, some anonymous, detailing horror stories of Pearson's courtroom. One read simply, he gave me 30 days for talking over him when I asked if I could call my lawyer. I was 19 still. Pearson refused to back down. He doubled his staff, beefed up security, demanded reporters remain outside the building, and then, on the 3rd day after the hearing, he made a miscalculation. Jasmine returned to court not as a defendant, but as an observer. She sat silently in the back row, no cameras, no press, just her and a quiet notepad. Pearson saw her, and it threw him. That morning, a 22-year-old man named Lon Vasquez stood before him, charged with disorderly conduct. It was his first offense. He had no priors. His lawyer motioned for dismissal due to lack of evidence. Pearson denied it, no explanation. Then Lyon made the mistake of raising his hand. Sir, I didn't even. Pearson cut him off. Another word, and you'll find yourself in contempt. Jasmine's pen froze on the paper. Leon looked to his lawyer, who whispered for him to stay silent. Pearson narrowed his eyes. You know what? 30 days in county lockup. Maybe that'll teach you how to behave in a courtroom. Gasps, whispered curses. Jasmine stood up slowly, steadying her breath. Her aide immediately texted the moment to their media contact. It was already too late for Pearson to reel it in. She walked out of the courtroom in silence, but her phone buzzed. Before she even reached the elevator, he did it again. The message read, Pearson, oblivious to the scale of what was unraveling around him, continued with business as usual. Gavel, slamming, voices raised. Dismissals denied, but outside the dominoes were already falling. State legislators began calling for an inquiry. The Texas Judicial Council announced an emergency session to review public complaints. The Bar Association began contacting former defendants, and at the center of the storm was Jasmine Crockett, still calm, still watching, still documenting. She wasn't looking for revenge. She was building a case, and she wasn't alone. By the end of the week, Jasmine Crockett's office was overwhelmed with a flood of first-hand accounts, legal documentation, and video footage from inside Judge Pearson's courtroom, some leaked by former clerks, others recorded discreetly by defendants and their families. What began as a moment of personal confrontation had exploded into a full-blown judicial reckoning. She hadn't called for a protest, but the people showed up anyway. Hundreds gathered outside the courthouse every day, holding signs that bore both pain and resolve. My voice matters. Courtrooms are not thrones. Thank you, Jasmine. Inside, Pearson remained defiant. He delivered rulings with clipped aggression, each verdict laced with the bitterness of a man watching his unchecked reign crumble. The spotlight was now a permanent fixture in his courtroom. Every decision was dissected in real time by lawyers, journalists, activists, even other judges. The Texas Judicial Conduct Commission announced a formal review of Pearson's court, citing disturbing patterns of punitive behavior inconsistent with judicial ethics. That alone would have been a stunning development under normal circumstances, but this wasn't normal anymore. Jasmine didn't just sit back and watch. She turned pressure into policy. She drafted a bipartisan bill that called for the implementation of mandatory judicial bias training, increased oversight of local courts, and an independent review board composed of former judges, public defenders, and community advocates to audit courtrooms across the state. It was named the Courtroom Accountability and Fairness Enforcement Act, or CAFE, a nod to the idea that justice should be as accessible and transparent as a public space, not locked behind mahogany doors. And fear the bill gained traction quickly. Lawmakers who had once sidestepped courtroom reform suddenly found their inboxes flooded with letters, phone calls, and voter demands. Jasmine testified before a subcommittee, laying out a precise, unwavering account of what she had witnessed, backed now by hundreds of pages of evidence and testimony. This isn't about one judge, she said, eyes locked on the panel. It's about a system that allows silence to masquerade as fairness. If this can happen in Dallas, it can happen anywhere, but it's not going to happen anymore, not on our watch. Her words hit their mark. The bill advanced, but the courtroom showdown wasn't finished. The day Judge Pearson's judicial conduct hearing began, Jasmine arrived early. This time, not as a defendant, not as a spectator, but as a witness. Her testimony was scheduled for the second half of the day, but her presence in the hearing chamber sent an unmistakable signal. She was still standing, and she was watching. Pearson entered with his usual self-importance, flanked by a pair of gray-suited attorneys. He gave the briefest glance in her direction, but she didn't look away. He took his seat at the respondents' table. Ironically, the same table where so many young defendants had once pleaded for fairness. The first half of the hearing was damning. Former public defenders testified about Pearson's erratic rulings in open disdain for younger attorneys to clerks. Read excerpts from internal memos, where Pearson referred to defendants as children who need a good scare. A Latina attorney recounted a case where Pearson dismissed her motion without hearing it, saying, "You can save your dramatics for immigration court." The panel sat stone-faced by the time Jasmine took the stand. The silence in the room was electric. She raised her hand, swore, and sat, her voice steady and unwavering. She recounted the events of her court appearance, the unnecessary contempt charge, the mocking tone, the bias masked as protocol, but she didn't stop there. "I'm not here to a personal grievance," she said. "I'm here to point to a pattern. I've spoken with defendants." Pearson sentenced with attorneys who feared retaliation, with clerks who were forced to remain silent. "And I ask you, what does it say about our courts when justice is feared more than crime?" Pearson's lead attorney objected to her tone. The panel overruled him. She finished her statement without notes, no dramatics, no raised voice, just truth, and truth, when undeniable, is damning. By the end of the hearing, the panel announced that Judge Pearson would be placed under temporary suspension pending further investigation. The room erupted not in applause, but in relieved silence, as if a pressure valve had finally been released. The final blow came 3 days later. An emergency audit of Pearson's courtroom records revealed consistent patterns of disproportionate sentencing, frequent dismissals of motions without cause, and at least 42 confirmed contempt charges issued against defendants under the age of 25 for non-disruptive behavior. He was removed from the bench permanently, but Jasmine wasn't finished. She returned to Congress, now armed with both legislative backing and public momentum. Her bill CAFE passed the House with bipartisan support, then the Senate shortly after it was signed into law, amid a press conference that honored the voices of those Pearson had silenced for years. And with that, the first courtroom in Texas history was placed under community oversight, a model that would later be replicated in other states. Months later, a mural appeared on the side of a community legal aid center in Dallas. It depicted Jasmine Crockett standing outside the courthouse, one hand holding a scale of justice, the other holding open a courtroom door beneath it in bold paint. Justice isn't earned in silence, it's demanded in presence. She never asked to be the symbol of a movement, she only wanted fairness for herself and for everyone forced to sit quietly before a gavel that had long forgotten its purpose, but sometimes the match you strike to light your own path ends up setting the whole system ablaze, and in its ashes, something better can grow.